Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. Tonight it's the debate for the Democratic primary in the 34th Senatorial District, a district that includes the Bronx neighborhoods of Classen Point, Castle Hill, Soundview, Parkchester, Westchester Square, Ferry Point, Throgs Neck, Country Club, City Island, Pelham Bay, and sections of Morris Park, Pelham Parkway, and Eastchester. Tonight's program is presented in partnership with the League of Women Voters of New York City, a nonpartisan political organization that advocates for informed and active participation in government and works to increase understanding of major public policy issues. Our co-sponsors are the Bronx Times, City and State New York, City Limits, the Norwood News, The City, and WNYC, and we thank all of them for participating. The Democratic primary is on Tuesday, August 23rd. The early voting period is from August 13th to 21st. The deadline to request your absentee ballot in person is August 22nd. The deadline to return absentee ballots is primary day, August 23rd. The deadline for the Board of Elections to receive absentee ballots is August 30th, and those ballots must be postmarked by August 23rd. For more information for all of that, you can visit vote.nyc. Now let's meet the candidates. There is no incumbent in this race. Welcome to Christian Amato. He's a community organizer and campaigner who has worked in the New York State Senate as Deputy Chief of Staff and District Director. Nice to have you with us, Mr. Amato.
Great to be here, Gary.
John Perez is a community activist who is a retired Army combat veteran and a one-time Assembly District Leader. Nice to have you, John Perez.
Thank you, Gary.
Natalia Fernandez is the current Assembly member in the 80th Assembly District. Assembly member, nice to have you with us.
Thank you, Gary.
Let's review some of the rules. Candidates in tonight's debate, I will direct a question to one candidate. That candidate will have 90 seconds to respond, and then the other candidates will then each get 90 seconds to respond to the question before we proceed to the next question. Candidates will receive 30 and 15-second verbal time warnings. The moderator, and that's me, reserves the right to ask follow-up questions and also to allow for rebuttals and dialogue. Please note, after the initial answers, no statement can be longer than 30 seconds, and we ask the candidates be respectful and not talk over each other. Just raise your hand and I will recognize you. Also, please note that there will be no opening statements, but at the end of the program, each candidate will have 1 minute to offer a concluding comment. One final note before we begin: the questions on tonight's program include those submitted by the candidates themselves. Candidates, let's get right to it. First question by random draw earlier goes to you, Mr. Amato. Let's just start very generally. What makes you distinctive from the competition in this race? What should voters know about you and your agenda for the 34th Senatorial District? And we'll ask each candidate the same question.
Absolutely. That's a great question, Gary. First of all, I think the thing that makes me unique in this race is that I'm a lifelong resident of this district. I've been serving this community not just as a community organizer, but in our local government and also as a board member on Community Board 11, various local organizations like the Liberty Democratic Association, and also Community Board 11's Vice Chair of Transportation. In addition to all that work that I've done in our community on local organizations, I'm also a mutual aid organizer. During the pandemic, I formed a $500,000 partnership with Driscoll Foods to bring in over 500,000 pounds of fresh produce to the community to combat growing food insecurity. And during the pandemic, in its highest time of need, I was able to bring in 1 million masks and sanitizers to keep our communities safe. I believe that I'm an on-the-ground organizer that can connect our community to resources, and that's how I'd like to be running my Senate office, and that's why I think I'm distinctive in this race.
Thank you very much. Mr. Perez, same question. Give you a chance to introduce yourself.
My distinction is I've worked my entire life either in government or under government contract, working in the city council. I founded Nos Quedamos, a community organization, from the ground up for the community's needs. From there, transitioned over to become the project manager for the Bronx Local Development Corporation, the East Tremont section, with the store owners and the BLD over there. I worked very good with them. And then from there, I transitioned over to the Army, and I spent the last 20 years in the Army.
And of course, all of us, including me and here at BronxNet, we thank you for your service. Very
Thank you.
important to all of us that you did that. Assemblymember Fernandez, let's talk about your campaign and your candidacy.
Thank you so much, Gary. I've been working in this community for more than 10 years as a volunteer to a legislative staffer to then the Bronx Regional Director for the governor to now the Assembly member. And I've dedicated my life to public service. I have been on the ground for 10 years working with the community, closely speaking with them and bringing their concerns to Albany and at the time my principals to make sure that it was heard, it was addressed, and results were delivered. So I know I bring experience to this campaign and to this election, and I intend to keep that same motivation that I've had for the last 10 years to listen to my community, to be on the ground, and to deliver for them.
Thank you very much. Candidates, let's talk about one of the most controversial subjects in the 34th Senatorial District, and that's rezoning and development. Second question goes to you, Mr. Perez. Mayor Adams said he wants his administration to be yes when it comes to rezonings. There is a controversial rezoning proposed for 2945 Bruckner Boulevard that would bring 95 affordable apartments, a new supermarket, and other amenities. What do you think should be done with that proposal? And on a larger scale, maybe even more important, with evictions and homelessness exploding, do you believe it's every neighborhood's responsibility to find locations for affordable housing and to house the homeless? If so, where in this 34th Senatorial District do you propose it be built?
It's a long question. And try to dissect it.
It's an important question.
Oh,
I think.
definitely, definitely. I mean, the residents are clearly opposed to any rezoning that is going to compromise the integrity of the community as it is. Building a facility to hold that many people, that big of a structure, is going to impact somewhat negatively to the community. It's not going to be able to support the population. I mean, a lot of things have to be considered before that. I know that some of the schools around the area, schools that I went to, PS 14 and Henry Bruckner 101, I know they're starting to modify their buildings to support more people coming in. But we also have to look at the police department, which shares jurisdictions with Co-op City and divides their police force in that wide of an area. So we have to take a lot of consideration into that. But the community is opposed to it. So I stand with the community, and I'm opposed to any zoning that is going to compromise that integrity.
And does each community have responsibility for finding places, given that the affordable housing crisis is universal for every neighborhood?
Yeah, the community does have a responsibility. I mean, I'm a perfect example of that. When I started Nos Quedamos, we had to look at ways to accommodate so many people and how this revitalization program was going to happen. You're talking about a 100-block radius that we had to develop. In Throgs Neck, within the 34th Senate District, or we're talking about just the 13th Council District?
We're talking about the 34th, if that's what.
Right.
Let's give the others a chance. Did you want to just add one more thing to that?
Yeah, there's a lot of space that we can look at to accommodate in
affordable housing
in the 34th District. Yes.
Assemblymember Fernandez.
Thank you. Well, it's no secret that affordable housing and good housing in general is needed all over the city, and yes, in areas in the Bronx. But for this particular project, I have concerns with the density that it will bring to the community. And I do think we need to be smart about where we're placing these affordable housing units. Do we have schools to support the families that are coming in here? Do we have proper amenities nearby? Can our hospitals support a new influx of a population? And yes, I do think the community has responsibility to find proper locations, and this one in particular is not in the best location. There's not much of a transit network around it, and I do think that these new proposals need to be near transit hubs. So if I had to give a suggestion, it would be in the upcoming Metro North stations that are coming to the 34th in Morris Park and Park Chester Van Nest, and to make it less of an ease of parking. That is one big issue that many people worry about, is new families, new individuals, new residents with cars possibly, because the East Bronx is a transportation desert. Where's the parking going to go? So we do want incentives nearby, like the new trains, to help alleviate that need. But we need to make sure that we're not oversaturating our communities that aren't prepared for it and the other amenities that are nearby.
Thank you. Mr. Amato.
It's a great question, Gary, and I think the first thing we have to look at is the fact that our community is really expecting our elected officials to fight on our behalf and pass legislation and fight projects that we believe don't fit with the neighborhood character of our communities. Of course, we need affordable housing. We have 40,000 Bronxites who in the next 5 years are going to become senior citizens. We need senior housing so that this way our senior citizens are not displaced from the communities that they were raised in, that they grew up in, that they've invested in. A senior citizen should be able to go and shop in their community, see their friends, and unfortunately, we just don't have the housing to support them. So, for me, I'd like to be supporting projects that help our senior population, help young people have affordable housing, help reduce our homeless population. But of course, this Bruckner project is out of step with what the community wants, and we have to be paying attention to our local infrastructure. I think a top priority is addressing our sewage system, which can't handle the influx of heavy storm rains. That's a major priority, and as more development happens in our community, the infrastructure is going to have to catch up. We need to be prioritizing infrastructure first. That means transit infrastructure. That means sewage infrastructure. That means education infrastructure. If we have those things, then we can continue to develop communities and build more housing.
Thank you very much. I want to kind of follow up on this because it's been such a flashpoint for the community. I think Assemblymember Fernandez alluded to it, and that is the proposal at 1900 Seminole Avenue, which is on the Jacoby Hospital grounds, to repurpose an existing structure for a mix of formerly incarcerated people who are sentenced to a maximum of a year and are approved for release, and pretrial detainees who have not yet been convicted but are being held in custody because they can't make bail. 70 units, 50 of them for that population, with preference given to District 11 residents. We'll give you each 30 seconds. What do you think, John Perez? Is this a good project? Would you recommend doing that to provide service to this population?
No, I've been working with the community on this, and they are fighting these two proposals, the ones that we spoke to before, and this one in particular, because it is the worst possible thing that you can bring to this community. Bring in incarcerated or people that are aging out of the prison system, or they're sick and they just need somewhere to go. The community doesn't want this. Not only that, we have Albert Einstein. We have a whole bunch of students that are right there that are totally opposed to that. So what we don't want is a project like this.
Let me just ask you this, because I don't want to spend more time on this one subject. We have a lot to get to. What do you do with that population that has needs? Other than this particular project, is there another place? How would you handle it? We can't, because otherwise they're going to end up being
the people
homeless.
that are being released that were incarcerated,
Yes.
or they.
To prevent recidivism.
We already, that's a whole different subject, to prevent recidivism. These people are not going there to prevent recidivism. They're going there because they're aging out. We just had an incident with the same company where a violent a crime occurred.
We'll talk about that a little later. Assemblymember Fernandez, what do you think about that 1900 Seminole Avenue
It is
suggestion?
a project proposal that has drawn a lot of emotion, a lot of concerns that I have. And we're looking to seek all answers. The community is very much opposed to it, and I want to stand with my community into making sure that any new project investment initiative that is brought to the district is bringing a community benefit. What is this going to do for us here in the 34th district? What is it going to do for the safety of our community? So these are real questions that we need answered right away before anything moves forward with this project.
Will it take some people who need services and not give them the opportunity, and then they end up being a bigger load on all of our systems?
Well, that's the point of this project. There is a crisis in New York City with homelessness, with individuals that may be getting released from prison and do not have the stability of housing, of family, of seeking health care, that then they become the homeless individuals that we see on our streets. And in trying to alleviate that, this is a proposal to redirect them to a real path of stability and safety.
Mr. Amato, you get the idea. What do you think?
Well, as a board member of Community Board 11, we've been briefed on this project and have had the opportunity to hear from Jacoby themselves. And I want to say that the Fortune Society is an organization that's done really great work. That being said, I've also knocked all the doors in Indian Village where this project is coming in, and the community is concerned, and they're right to be. These are homeowners who have invested in a community and really hope that their property would yield value, and a project like this threatens that value. And we have to be considerate of those who have invested in our community as well.
Thank you very much. All right, let's move ahead. This for you, Assemblymember Fernandez. In June, in anticipation of a final decision by Supreme Court on Dobbs versus Jackson, which of course did eventually come through, Governor Hochul signed a comprehensive 6-bill package that protects both patients and providers when it comes to women's reproductive rights. The legislature then passed the Equality Amendment that secures abortion access. That's going to need another session to get it fully approved to help local women and out-of-staters seeking care, help women in states where abortion is illegal to visit New York to undergo the procedure. Is there more that a state senator would need to do in this regard, or did the legislature already take care of what is possible to be done?
Yes, there is more to do, and I'm very proud of the legislature that I've been a part of to help advance women's reproductive health and the right to access reproductive health. In my time in the Assembly, we've passed the Reproductive Health Act, contraceptive care, and now in this special session, we urge the governor to make sure that we did pass the ERA, that we took that first step to now when we come back to Albany next year, hoping we all come back, to vote on it again to make sure that it is finally codified. But there's still proposals to fund abortion access. There's proposals by other legislators right now that would create avenues to put some of your tax returns towards abortion funds to help the most vulnerable women in the state.
Mr. Amato?
Certainly, you know, this is a really important issue. And one of the reasons why 2018 was so important was when we were able to oust Jeff Klein from office, we elected Alessandra Biaggi, who really championed this legislation and made sure that it passed. It's important that we maintain codifying Roe in the state constitution so that this way we're always protecting bodily autonomy in the state of New York. More importantly, I think it's crucial that we're providing legislation that allows individuals to contribute to reproductive rights funds through their tax returns, that we're making it easier and safer for people to come to New York and seek an abortion if they come from another state. These are the ways we can protect bodily autonomy, protect reproductive rights here in New York. I'm proud that my campaign has been overwhelmingly been supported by a multiracial coalition of women across this district, and I'm determined to defend reproductive rights here in New York.
Mr. Perez?
I have a lot of reservations on that. I do feel that in some cases, abortion is necessary. But just because you woke up one day 9 months later and you decide to abort your child.
Well,
I
nobody
don't
can
think
have
it's
an
fair.
abortion at 9 months.
Comments.
That would not be accurate.
Well,
That is
there is
very
no
inaccurate.
there is no amount of time indicated when is it possible to do it. So, but abortion in general, I am a Christian, but I am on the fence on that. I do believe that in certain circumstances, abortion should be allowed, but not just because you feel like it or you just don't want to carry that responsibility anymore.
Assemblymember Fernandez, you had your hand up.
Yes, I just want to comment on the dangerous rhetoric that my opponent here has said, that women just wake up one day and feel like to have an abortion. Every abortion is a decision made by that woman and the doctor, and it is a decision that is private, and any reason that it should be is dignified. So you cannot say that a woman just wakes up one day and decides she doesn't want her baby.
Then why are we discussing it?
Because
If it's a
doctors need
private
to
issue
have,
Of course,
between
it
the doctor
involves
and we're
legislation.
passing legislation on something that is going to be an open field.
but part of the legislation is protecting the doctors that need to practice these healthcare procedures.
Mr. Amato, you can get the final word here.
Sure, whether or not it's private between a woman and their doctor, our job as legislatures is to defend the rights of all our constituents. And it's crucial that we stand with women. It's crucial that we protect their bodily autonomy. And it's incredibly important for us to be open and holistic in how we think about public health. As men, we have to defend women. We can't scrutinize on whether or not they're going to seek an abortion.
Well, I'm the only one that has children here. I have 6 children,
I don't think that matters.
5 that are adults and 1 13-year-old, and I could not imagine having a life without them.
I hope they continue to grow up and stay healthy. Mr. Amato, next question for you. Climate change is real. As we speak, Kentucky is roiling from devastating killer floods, and in California, as we speak, across the state, acres and homes are burning out of control. In New York, we've had a historically hot summer, as we all know when we walked into the studio today. Homes are burning out of control across the country, rains that have caused floods, and we all know the Hurricane Ida flooded out the Major Deegan Expressway just a year ago. It can happen to any community at any time, in particular to the shoreline communities in the 34th Senatorial District. So what actions should the state Senate take to protect our lives, our homes, and our communities?
Absolutely. Gary, this is my favorite topic. Across this district, from Soundview all the way to the corner of New Rochelle and in Pelham, people in District 34 are feeling the impact of the environmental crisis. We see it every time we get a hurricane or a flash flood. Our communities flood. Constituents lose basement apartments, lose cars, and lose countless pieces of property on top of the public health risks that come post-flood. For us, the biggest things we can do: protect our shoreline, protect our coastal communities, invest in coastal resiliency, including efforts to redo our sewer systems so that this way our communities are no longer flooding. We've got to pass bills like the Build Public Renewables Act. We've got to establish a carbon tax on our state's biggest polluters so that this way we have a financial pot that allows us to make the resiliency investments that our communities need. As a coastal community, we should absolutely pass the Living Shorelines Act. We absolutely need to bring public power into New York State because power is a part of this too. Our electricity plays a big role in this. We need public power that's owned by the people. Otherwise, Con Edison is going to continue to charge us higher and higher rates. There are many ways that we can combat the climate crisis, and I'm prepared to do that. I'm the only candidate with a comprehensive climate plan in this race.
Mr. Perez.
I've been working on this issue since Nos Quedamos, and we addressed those issues also in the Soundview section. Impact studies have already been made in Hunts Point shoreline. It's been made in Soundview. It's been made in City Island. FEMA has made impact studies also, and they made their recommendations. The only thing that we need is the money. That's all we're waiting for is the money. We have the impact studies already done. We already have the recommendations. We know what needs to happen. We just need the money. So continuously passing legislation after legislation to support something that's already been done, I think is useful. I think that we should just concentrate on getting the funding to get these walls lifted, get the sewers redone, and make everything happen.
Assemblymember Fernandez, and then we'll get back to you, Mr. Amato. Go ahead.
Thank you. His last statement was a good segue. We do need the funding, and the CCIA, the Community Climate Investment Act, will provide that funding. I've been a co-sponsor of that bill since I've entered the Assembly. I've been a proponent and an advocate in Albany and in the community here in the Bronx to make sure that that is a priority. And we've taken many steps and have done great in this state legislature to get to this point, but of course no more needs to be done. Of course we need to see our communities invested in. Yes, the infrastructure, yes, the roads, let's stop the flooding, let's look at the sewer systems. But we need to also look at the communities as a whole. And the overheating of communities, we mentioned the heat waves. We need to put more trees. Trees do help bring shade and it cools down communities, reducing possibilities of heat stroke. But the funding is critical and we need to get this legislature on board so we can bring back those investments to help build that resiliency in our communities, to create grants for homeowners so they can literally lift their homes off the grounds, because right now the coastal areas are dangerous and we don't know when the next natural disaster is coming, when the next massive flood is coming. So we need to get this money to our districts ASAP.
Mr. Amato, you wanted to answer. I'm just going to add one more question. It seems plainly obvious, frankly, to me, that these are things that are needed, yet it's still a fight in Albany. So maybe any of you can address that. But Mr. Amato, what are your thoughts about actually getting the money and getting attention to this very important issue?
Well, like Assemblymember Fernandez said, passing the CCIA, the Climate Community and Investment Act, is an incredibly important part, because the Climate Community Investment Act is part 2 to the CLCPA. And the CLCPA created a body that would ultimately help us meet our climate goals, but the CCIA will provide the funding to do so. And how that will work is by establishing a carbon tax, but what we've also got to establish are weatherization tax relief for our constituents. These are many community homeowners who own homes that are at risk of flooding, are at risk of seeing their homes destroyed due to rising waters. What we have to do is provide them tax incentives for weatherization. So if you want to install solar panels or new windows, or you want to install geothermal heat, that's the best way that we can be weatherizing and growing more resiliency in our community for our homeowners, providing them incentives through their taxes.
Thank you. Great. Anybody else wanted to weigh in on that?
I just feel that, realistically, you have 2 years in order to achieve certain things, and people don't understand what the acronyms that he was just talking about. People want real solutions to their problems, and they want them quick. 2 years is not enough time to accommodate everything that Christian Amato is talking about.
Ms. Fernandez, then Mr. Amato will get the final word. Go ahead.
Well, part of our role is to educate the community about the resources and the solutions.
It's part of what we're doing tonight.
Exactly. So CCIA, Community Climate Investment Act, is a way to bring the funding. And we have to let it be known far and wide, because the more people that become aware of an issue, that support it, it can push the needle to make sure that it does pass in the legislature. And we're still educating many people, not only in this district, but all over the borough and the state. So it is something possible to achieve in 2 years, getting to that next step, so then the next term we can act on it.
Mr. Amato, final word, no
Yeah,
more than 30
absolutely.
seconds, please.
It's incredibly important for us to use the next 2 years to pass this legislation, John, because ultimately what we're talking about is our future, our children's future, your children's future. And if we don't pass these pieces of legislation and bring this funding in to tackle these issues around our environment, that's the cost of our lives. That's the cost of our planet and our communities. And we can't afford that. So we have to use the next 2 years as effectively as possible to make sure that we're making real strides in climate resilience and climate change policy.
Mr. Perez, I thought it was interesting in the recent Schnepp's media debate in response to a question about fighting crime and giving young people productive activities to keep them off the street, you proposed a printing operation that would teach kids to make T-shirts and also produce political literature for elected officials. I'm not sure about the viability of that particular aspect of it. But that aside, to implement something like this or any similar development program for youth, doesn't this require development and expansion of community centers? You seem to put that aside in your answer to the question. So the bottom line is, what can a state senator do to help youth in the 34th senatorial district to grow and develop productively, and of course at the same time keeping them off the streets so they don't commit crime?
Absolutely. My job is to lead, to inspire, to open up your creative mind. If you take a printing operation, only takes about $300. I can fund that and put it together. And you start teaching young kids to print their own T-shirts, 1 color, 2 color, 3 color. You ask Ms. Fernandez, who's running for office, you say, hey, listen, you want to keep our kids off the street, you want to invest in that.
Where do you operate a program like that? I mean, does it come out of somebody's
You
bedroom?
know, some of the greatest
Don't you
programs.
need a community center in order to do that?
No, some of the greatest programs come out of people's basement. You started
So
your
you're
DJ.
saying
You started your
senatorial
DJ
program that you would fund would come out of somebody's basement?
No, I'm just saying that, we would have to look at where we would be able to open up. I mean, I know
I
in
see.
Throgs Neck there's a couple of places. I know that Frank Bees has a couple of properties around the area that I wouldn't mind sitting down with him and saying, hey, listen, if we can open up something. And it's self-sustaining. So it's not something that we have to constantly keep feeding because it's self-sustaining. You are creating equity with the product that they're putting out. So it's not something that you have to continuously feed. Now you're teaching these kids, marketing, not only just printing, marketing, accounts payable, accounts receivable, calling people up for contracts. They can do their own shirts for their own schools. You have to engage the community. You have to have them engage in the community, have the community embrace
Thank
them
you.
and support them.
Assemblymember Fernandez?
Youth development has been a priority of mine even before I wasn't elected. Back when I was a staffer, I went above and beyond and tried to connect students to internships and jobs within the community. It was even documented in the Bronx Times. They wrote an article about it. But my time in the assembly, I've dedicated so much energy and passion and funding to the community centers like that we have in our NYCHAs, the MMCC centers, to Bronx House, to various outlets where we can give students that experience, that exposure of a new talent or something they didn't think that they were interested in. And partnering with businesses is how we can connect them quicker to a possible job, but also helping our business thrive and continue to service their clientele. So investing in our youth is a priority. After school programs. I'm so happy to see that we expanded the amount of students that can get to jobs with the YSEP program. I have interns in my office right now because I wanted them to get that real life experience and making sure that they have that opportunity, giving them the opportunity, funding programs like education through music, which I've done in the state assembly, and supplying the tools so they can experience these things, discover their talents, is how we can get them off the streets and not doing negative activity and on the pathway to a job, a career that they love to do.
Is the answer to doing more of that, which seems like both of you are enthusiastic to doing, a funding question? Simply getting raising the priority level of that in the
It is, especially when it comes to our schools. Many schools don't have the after-school programs. They don't invest in the amenities like a technology shop, so they can discover what these skills are, discover what these new trades are. And trade schools, we need to have plenty of those too. We don't have enough anymore because many students don't take that path to college, and they should be able to see and be proud that entering an apprenticeship to becoming a member of a union is a successful career.
Thank you. Mr. Amato?
Ultimately, we're talking about getting kids off the streets and making sure that they have a healthy, happy, and productive life. And coming out of this pandemic, what's super important for our children is to make sure that they're learning empathy, that they feel cared for. And the ways to do that are by investing in them. It's not lost on me that when we have healthy, funded summer youth employment programs, the data shows us that activity, violent crime, gang activity decreases. And so we need a healthy, fully funded summer youth employment program so that kids can learn a skill, get a job, and find something to do that gets them off the street. But more importantly, we have to take more holistic methods to invest in our children. I believe that there's a major connection between the arts and restoring our public safety. We are devoid of real arts programming here in the 34th District. Before I got involved in politics, I was a Broadway producer and director. And one program that I had worked on was through a grant I received through the Onassis Institute, where I was able to bring Shakespeare into our schools here in the Bronx and Westchester. And seeing the way those kids reacted to seeing a play for the first time is inspiring, but it shows us that we have to bring art to our youth. We have to invest in programming that educates them, teaches them empathy, and makes them more creative. Those are the things that are going to make our youth thrive, feel recognized, and make our communities more vibrant, and that's where I'd like to be allocating our resources.
Thank you. Assemblymember Fernandez, let's talk about fighting crime, starting with the crime budget. Does it make sense, I mean, this is related to the question we just reviewed, does it make sense to reapportion funds marked for crime and corrections and use it for targeted programs that keep kids off the streets and job training and development programs that we just talked about, and other programs maybe to help adults fight poverty? And so let's start there, and then we can talk about bail reform as well. What are your thoughts about the crime budget right now?
I do think it is a smart long-term goal to invest in these different areas, because as much as we want to see the immediate change of crime decreasing, we have to look at the long run. So yes, I do think the budget could be reworked in a way, but not to take away from our officers that need to be present on the street, that need to do their jobs and protect our communities.
Mr. Amato?
Sure. Budgets are fluid documents. They're going to change with each year. Some years we're going to require more funding towards the community. Other years we're going to require more funding towards equipment or training. I definitely think we need to be allocating more funding to police training. We need cops walking the beat. That's what our community wants, and that's what's going to keep our streets safe. But I do believe, and we've seen it happen time and time again, that we should be investing in smart community programming as well. We've seen Jacoby Hospital's SUV program, Stand Up to Violence program, as a well-funded program that's really working with the community to combat gun violence. I think those are great methods to building more community programming that keeps our communities safe while educating young people and old people alike.
Mr. Perez?
I just think it's very hypocritical for him to even make a statement regarding any of those programs when he was for defunding the police. He was against the police. He marched against the police.
I've marched for police accountability.
Let's let him finish, and then I'll give you a chance, Mr.
You can request accountability in other ways, but to hold a poster saying that all cops are bastards and next to somebody that says blue lives don't matter is the wrong message for any candidate, any civilian in any community to represent.
Mr. Amato?
Sure. I think it's incredibly hypocritical that my opponent here, John Perez, is talking about making T-shirt shops as a method to create public safety and would criticize me when in fact he's currently violating DOD laws by using campaign materials that show him in a military uniform and using military insignia. How do you respect the military when you're violating their current laws against using their image on your campaign materials?
What is the law?
The DOD law states that you can't use...
What is the law?
The DOD law states that you cannot use campaign imagery that has you in a military uniform or utilizes military insignia, which you continue to do and you plaster all over your social media.
I don't know what the law is, but I'm very well versed in that particular law. Now, there is
Clearly
one
you're
clause.
not.
There is one
And if you
clause
want to
that-
be a legislator, you should know what the law is.
Oh, I do know the law. And
You
I know
just
what
said you
you're
don't know
actually-
what the law is.
No, I don't know
Mr.
what law you're
Perez a
referring
chance
to,
to
but-
answer.
DOD law.
Any
Department
part
of Defense
of
law.
my
Mr. Amato, let him
there's
answer.
no such thing.
There is.
Any part of my uniform that is not within regulation is not regulation. It's not regulation. That's why we can have service members or uniforms in movies. And I believe the law is the paramount law that allows movies to utilize like
Although, of course,
military.
a film is a
Correct.
commercial
It's still the
film
same thing.
is
We're not in a
different
movie,
than-
John.
You know, I tell you, I represent,
Miss-
I wear my uniform to represent my friends, my buddies who died in combat, and I earned that uniform.
My brother
Got it.
served
All right.
7 tours of duty. My father's a retired Air
Let's-
Force
let's-
veteran, and you
Outstanding.
violate.
But you can't-
violate
You
their
can't- you-
dignity
you
by
can't
campaigning
quote-
in your
you
uniform.
can't quote what the law
Gentlemen,
is.
let's-
It's DOD flag law.
There's no such thing.
I will.
There
I will
is.
post it.
There is
Gentlemen,
no
I'll
DOD
make sure
flag
to
law.
pin it on my social media
We
after
got,
this
we
debate.
got time for one more question. We'll just go around because it involves crime and safety. So, Assemblymember Fernandez, you get a chance to talk about it. Let's talk about bail reform. How much does bail reform and what was passed by the legislature and then amended contribute to the rise in crime numbers? And do you think more needs to be done?
At this moment, we haven't seen statistics to show that more needs to be done. I know the mayor has been presenting it recently, saying that it is the reason for the spike in crime, but the real statistics that are out there show that bail reform is working. There have been some amendments needed, and I attest to that because I voted in favor of them. Early on, we added arson and sex trafficking to what is bailable. And now in this legislative session, we did add that gun offenses can be bailable. So in many of the cases that the mayor has listed, those cases can be bailable. So yes, I agree with the governor in saying that we do need to further educate on the law so our judges can implement it correctly. But with the concerns that currently rise with bail reform, I do think that there is a lot of misleading, and we need to follow the statistics and the facts.
Mr. Amato?
Sure thing. 50,000 people have been released from prisons based on this current bail reform law. Out of those 50,000 people, 1%, 1,199 people have gone back and committed a violent crime. To me, that data signifies that there isn't any fault with bail reform. What we're at fault with is how we're handling cases that involve mental health or serious offenders, serious repeat offenders. And so what I believe is that we should be investing our time in creating better solutions for them. The legislature is incredibly supportive of bail reform. There doesn't seem to be any intention to change those pieces of legislation. What we need to do is work on that 1% of the population that's been released and is going back and committing repeat offenses and finding solutions for them, investing in better mental health solutions, and investing in first responders that are trained to respond to mental health crises. And we have to make sure that we are providing a real methodological approach to how we're making sure that these constituents are being cared for. Whether they're gun violence offenders, whether they're offenders of violent crimes, they need a different level of care than your average criminal.
Mr. Perez?
I think bail reform is the most reckless law ever to be passed in our state legislature. The 34th Senate District is relatively low density, but when you look at other areas like the South Bronx, the deep South Bronx, you look at Hunts Point, you look at the 40th Precinct, those demographics, you look at Manhattan, you look at Brooklyn, we're seeing a different story than what their surrounding block is. I mean, I've lived in the South Bronx, I've lived all over the place. the South Bronx is being hit very, very hard. And the ones that are suffering the most are these little children who are being at the wrong place at the wrong time, but just as reckless. Now,
We're almost out of time, so finish your statement, and then we're going
Go
to have to
ahead.
cut it off because I want to make sure we get closing statements in. Finish what you were saying.
no, I just know personally, I know one of the victims, the recent victims, which was Little Tay. I knew her personally, and I take that very to heart. Now, also remind you that my father was also shot and
I'm
killed.
sorry to hear that, certainly. Lady and gentlemen, it's time now for closing statements. We each have 1 minute. We've reviewed a lot. Believe me, we could go on for a long time, but let's get to closing statements. Each of you 1 minute. Christian Amato, you're first.
Great. It's great to be here with you today, Gary. My name is Christian Amato. I'm a proud Bronxite, I'm a proud Democrat, and I'm the proud son of Italian immigrants who came to this community in the 1950s and 60s. My family opened up a dry cleaner on Arthur Avenue, bought a home on Pelham Parkway, and that's where they raised my brother and I. I'm a part of the fabric of this community. It's my home, my family lives here, my friends live here, and I've organized side by side with many in this district. I'm fighting for the collective humanity of our district, fighting for climate change, fighting for infrastructure, and fighting to make sure that our kids and families in this district have a place to call home. As your state senator, I'll be ready to serve you on day one. I've met the needs of this community time and time again. As an organizer, I got my start organizing to provide DACA relief to immigrants across the community. I continue to organize, building a mutual aid network to combat food insecurity and fight this pandemic. And now I've been campaigning and knocking on thousands of doors to learn the concerns of our neighbors. I'm here to
Thank
listen, to provide equity to our community, and fight for the best interests of this district with love,
Thank you.
passion, and public service.
Mr. Perez.
Yes. My name is John Perez. I'm running for the 34th 6th Senate District. I don't have a long story. I don't have anything rehearsed. All I can tell you is that on the 23rd, come out and vote for the best person that you think is going to meet our community's needs. Take the time to invest, but overall, come out and vote, whether it's for me, Christian Amato, or Natalia Fernandez. Come
Thank
out
you
and
very
vote.
much. Assemblymember Fernandez, you get the final word of the evening.
Thank you so much, Gary, and thank you for this debate tonight. To my friends, colleagues, neighbors, and constituents, and hopefully future constituents. I am Natalia Fernandez, and I currently serve in the State Assembly, but I have been a public servant and a dedicated, reliable friend to many for the last 10 years. Many can say that they've gotten responses from me, that I've shown up when you needed to, and I've delivered when you needed to. And I intend to keep that reputation as I move on to the State Senate. I have always prioritized our youth, our seniors, and the uplifting of this community. As your state senator, I will continue to address climate resiliency. I will look at our property taxes to make sure that our commercial businesses are not being taxed out, that everyone has a possibility for a future of being a homeowner in this district, and that everyone can succeed working, living, and thriving in this district. I have given my everything for the last 10 years to the Bronx, and I intend to continue to doing that. So please let me be your next state senator. I will be there as I've been, and I will continue to listen to you, walk on the ground, bring your concerns from here in the Bronx to Albany and Westchester to Albany to make sure that we truly deliver for the 34th.
Christian Amato, John Perez, Natalia Fernandez, thank you so much for joining us. I know that you might not agree on everything, but I know you will all agree with me that every eligible voter should come out on August 23rd. There is a lot of information people want about voting. You can just simply visit vote.nyc and you can see all the information there. We do want to thank our partners, the League of Women Voters. For more information, please call the League at 212-725-3541. They, of course, are the League of Women Voters of New York City. And thanks to our co-sponsors, the Bronx Times, City and State New York, City Limits, the Norwood News, The City, and WNYC. Next week, we will have the debate for the Democratic primary in the 33rd Senatorial District. Please be sure to vote on August 23rd, and good night.